Hello and welcome to another episode of The Well-Appointed Mystic, and today I will be doing a VR to Moonflower Moments? Yeah, Moonflower Moments. Her tarot tag, first 5, last 5 tarot decks. And I thought it was a really fun video, and what was surprising was I thought I wouldn't remember what my first 5 tarot decks were, but it was actually easier to remember the first 5 than the last 5. I had to do a little searching to figure those out. So let's get started. We will do the first 5 tarot decks I ever purchased. Now, you might notice that there's only 4 here, and that is because one of the decks that I purchased, I almost immediately got rid of. I think I took it to a secondhand bookstore, and I will go into a little more detail about that in a minute. But these are the other 4. So, and I've talked about this a little bit before, I think, when I did my mini decks. But my first deck, I was very, very poor, and I lived down the street from the occult bookstore in Wicker Park in Chicago. And I didn't have a lot of money, but I really wanted a tarot deck. So this was back in the late 90s. I purchased a copy of the miniature Rider-Waite tarot deck. This was a A.G. Mueller version, distributed by US Games. And of course, at the time, I don't even think it might have had a little white book, but it was one of those little white books that had like 4 languages in it. So it literally had like 2 words for each card. And back in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of internet access to tarot information. So I looked at it a lot and tried to figure things out. But mostly I kind of just sat on the deck for a while and didn't really use it. In retrospect, like I look at this deck now and I'm like, yes, it's tinier than a lot of the current mini decks, but the cardstock is really nice and easy to shuffle despite it being this teeny tiny deck. It's kind of fun to shuffle, and I quite like it, but the copyright on the side says 1971. So they've basically been, and the colors on this one are it's bright, but not as garish, I think, as some of the later versions. So this was my very first tarot deck, this little teeny tiny, and I want to say, I thought for a while this still had the price tag on it, but I want to say I paid like $5 or $7 for it. And I was, like I said, I was very poor. There were 3 of us living in an apartment in Wicker Park before Wicker Park was cool. And that was my deck. Now, this deck gets talked about a lot. This is my Vertigo Tarot. It is based on characters from the Vertigo world, which is a DC Comics. So each of these is a character like from The Endless, or, one of the other stories. This is Black Orchid. So just different characters from the stories which help. This is John Constantine. This is Mad Hetty from Sandman, Death, Sandman's sister. So like all of these details that really helped me a bit. This is obviously Lucifer. So it's, if you are a fan of all of the Sandman and this is from Books of Magic. But yeah, so the minors are kind of pippish and a little bit more challenging to read, and definitely was very challenging as a new reader. But the book that came with it was written by Rachel Pollack and has some great information, and I will continue to complain about the typesetting and the fancy pants ray gun style shapes that all the lettering appeared in, which I'm sure in the 90s was really challenging to do, to create these like weird spaces, but it also means that the type is so incredibly tiny, and I am now of the age where teeny tiny type can kind of be a pain in the butt. So that said, this was my second deck. So as you can see, my first couple decks were not super easy to use. My third deck, which I will pop a picture of here, was a Aleister Crowley Thoth deck, which I flipped through, and again, it was in the 90s. The packaging had very little information, and it just had some pretty freaky, frightening images to not have a lot of context for. So I didn't know what to do with it, and I was like, this is super creepy. Crowley is a weirdo. And I resold the deck almost immediately. Now, 20 some odd years later, I have more understanding about that, and I may at some point repurchase a Crowley deck, but for the time being, I have not gone back into that world. So fast forward 25 years and, or 22 years, something like that. I was working for a company called Victorian Trading Company, and, they decided that they really leaned heavily into as a gift and home decor product company. And we really leaned into Halloween and spooky and a little, sort of that whole perspective of spiritualism from the Victorian age and stuff like that. And so we did actually sell some tarot cards in our catalog. So we sold the original Centennial deck and everything. And so I got a copy and discovered YouTube and TarotTube, and it unleashed the tarot monster that lived within me, and I was off to the races. But it wasn't until 2022 when all of a sudden there were all of these resources available and online places to look and podcasts and all kinds of other stuff that really helped to sort of open up and make this far more accessible and easier to understand, and me to be more confident about wanting to learn more about it without being fearful that people were going to judge me harshly or anything like that. So kind of quickly after that, I started buying decks like a crazy person, because I was able to obviously find books that referenced the RWS. And so I was able to sort of start to learn about each of the cards and what they meant and numerology, and just kind of I dove in head first. So the last deck is the Dreamkeepers Tarot. This was I guess, of the first 5, the most recent. And this was probably purchased in the middle of 2022, I think. And this initially was super excited about it. I kind of very quickly then purchased the Mystical Moments, the Tarot Mystical Moments, which is a bit brighter color, and became a quicker read for me. This one was a little bit different, and for whatever reason I just warmed up to the Mystical Moments more than Dreamkeepers. But I do really like this deck, and I think that when compared with Mystical Moments, this one is a little, I don't want to say darker, but there is more masculine energy, I think. And just, it is a little dreamier, where Mystical Moments definitely feels fantastical and sort of fairy tale-ish. This one just has a little bit darker edge, And so it was a deck and it came with a lovely guidebook and everything. The cardstock is very nice. It's a matte finish. This is totally my aesthetic. After working at Victorian Trading, this was spot on, like perfect, both this one and Mystical Moments. But I bought this before I bought Mystical Moments. So if we're going to be all legit, then the Dreamkeepers was one of the earliest purchases that I made in the 2020s. So those were my first 5. So it took me a minute or two to find all of the last 5. So the last 5 decks that I purchased kind of range between August of this year and September, October, whatever month we are in now. And the first one, so this would be the least recent of the last 5, is Tarot Landscapes, which I got, I think, sometime in August. I was kind of late to this party. I know that this deck came out probably a bit earlier this year, but I wasn't sure if it would resonate with me. I have not really gotten a chance to work with it because I did sort of go on a deck buying rampage over the last couple months, but I do think it is beautiful. I really like the artwork, and I like that it stretches my thinking a little bit about each of these cards. So I am really hoping to work with this deck. I'm aiming for spring of next year, just because I feel like a lot of the imagery feels very springtime, you know, like a lightning bug and stuff like that. So it's very dreamy and sweet. I say that as the devil card comes up and he's got like little glowy red eyes, but you know, the wolf and the lamb drinking out of the same. There's just some really nice little details in here that I think introduce a different perspective. Like looking at these goldfish and you see that there's a little sandcastle. So obviously these goldfish are probably in captivity, like in a bowl. So the Hanged Man here takes on a very different meaning, sort of making the best of a maybe not an optimal situation. So it's like the salmon swimming upstream. So there's just some really interesting like storytelling and details. So I'm really looking forward to working with this. I definitely think that this is going to be one of my monthly deep dive decks. So this is Tarot Landscapes. Also in August, I bought the B Tarot, which was a deck I did not expect to love as much as I do. It is that beautiful linen cardstock from Llewellyn that they've used on a few decks now. The artwork on this is very well crafted. I love the variety of figures. While a large portion of this obviously is focused on bees, it's also about the honey that they produce and the pollination and things that are made from honey. So it's just a beautiful deck. The colors are gorgeous. It was perfect to use in like August and September. It just has that vibe to me of that sort of late summer feel. So this was deck number 4 in my 5 most recent decks. This was surprise hit of the summer. This is the Every Little Thing You Do Is Magic Tarot. I found this just popped up on Amazon, and I was like, well, that looks interesting. I'll give it a try. And so it combines collage work with some hand drawing elements. It has this really fun hand-drawn card back. And the biggest surprise of all was that the guidebook includes not only sort of meanings and things, but it also includes a scent, a song, a crystal, like a lot of little details that really enhance. And like honestly, my favorite part is that they include a song for each card. And so in some instances, I have listened to tracks and been like, okay, that seems like a good fit for that card. And in other cases, I'm like, no, I don't know what you were thinking. So it's made it a fun adventure to sort of look into those types of things and think about how our other senses can be engaged when we're doing tarot. So like, you know, lots of people talk about anointing their hands. And so we've talked a lot about scent. We talk about having candles and other things like that, but the music part was what really touched me, thinking about how emotional music can make us, both positive and negative. We could make us cry, it can make us happy, it can make us want to dance. So yeah, so this is a deck that if you haven't had a chance to give it a try yet, I highly recommend it. I find the artwork very interesting, very appealing, and because it is a mass market deck from Clarkson Potter, it's listing the price at $24. So usually through Amazon, it's a couple dollars cheaper. So it is a, it is a very reasonably priced deck. The cards are particularly large when you compare them to, they're more like oracle size. So when you compare them to a standard Llewellyn, you can see it's much bigger. But this goes back to, I think lots of other tarot tubers have said it, that there's always exceptions to your rule, and my rule is I prefer smaller decks, but in this case, I'm willing to make an exception because I really enjoy this deck. I really like the artwork. And pointing out, there are some decent sized borders on here, so it is possible that I could trim this deck if I wanted to, without too much trouble. And if I'm not crazy about it, it is a mass market, so I could buy another copy. So then, slowly working to my most recent purchase. This is the technically these would, the last two would be side by side, and that is the Steampunk Fairy Tarot and the Good Fortune Tarot. And so these both I purchased in September. I realize it's only like the 7th of October, but I want to brag that I haven't bought any decks this month. I know that seems silly, but there you have it. So these are the last two, and I will pull the guidebooks out of the way. But yeah, so these are both fairly recently released. This is the Steampunk Fairy by Pamela Chen, and this is the Good Fortune Tarot by Barbara Moore and Jessica Rue. And what I find so interesting is that I was unsure about both of these decks and whether I would like the artwork, and it has turned out that I do really like the artwork on both of these. So I think that I'm looking forward to opportunities to work with both of these. I actually think that I might plan to use the Steampunk Fairy Tarot for like a December deck. It has a bit of that more wintry vibe, maybe. And I'm saving the Good Fortune for spring next year because I do feel like it just has a very springy sort of vibe to it. But anyway, so there are lots of walkthroughs of these decks. If you are so curious, there's also a great interview on Lisa Pepez's channel with Barbara Moore about the making of the Good Fortune Tarot, Good Fairy Tarot. Yeah, so these are both really great, fun decks. And now, my world will come to a screeching halt if I mix the two together. So let's keep those separate. So my first 5 and last 5 tarot decks. There you have it. I went from a teeny tiny little deck to a great big deck. I went from thinking I would never like anything like this Steampunk Fairy Tarot to, maybe reconsidering whether or not I will repurchase the Crowley Thoth, however you say it. Someone please tell me the right way to say it. I feel like such an idiot. But yeah, so I would be delighted to hear what your first 5 and last 5 tarot decks were. I just find it fascinating to see sort of how we change as readers. If we are drawn to particular aesthetics and then we start experimenting. And I feel like for me, I'm starting to go outside of my comfort zone in terms of aesthetics and moving away from more entirely RWS based decks to things that will challenge me a little bit more and require more intuition and maybe a little book study. So anyway, thanks so much for watching this video. Let's see your first 5, last 5 tarot decks, and I'll talk to you again soon.